psilocybin session. Now, that paper didn't focus specifically on creativity. I did an entire episode on creativity that talked about different types of meditation, like open monitoring meditation. It talked about different patterns of thinking that one can actually practice to increase creativity. We had arguably one of the most creative people on the planet, Rick Rubin, came on this podcast, talked about the creative process from the perspective of music and his role in producing music. So you can check out those episodes if you're interested in the neural circuitry related to creativity. At least at the time of recording this episode, there haven't been a lot of studies looking specifically at the brain networks that we think are involved in creativity and how those change in response to psilocybin and other psychedelics. I imagine those studies are either happening now or will happen in the future. But the studies I just described, referring to the changes in emotionality and responses to music, I think provide a nice template for what's likely happening both during psilocybin journeys and after those psilocybin journeys. When we talk about less hierarchical organization, more connectivity between brain areas, what it's pointing to is the fact that during the psilocybin journey, people have the opportunity to learn new relationships between different sensory and emotional states. And those new relationships seem to persist long after the psychedelic journey has been finished. And a lot of people researching psilocybin in the clinical setting think that that's one of the major reasons why psilocybin and other psychedelics can rewire our relationship to things more broadly. It allows for new learning, new contingencies. And when we look at depression, we often think, diminished mood, people now have an appetite, they're not interested in social relationships or romantic relationships, they're really struggling. And all of that, of course, is true. But another lens to look at depression through is that a lot of that thinking and a lot of those emotional states that are negative are somewhat habitual. They relate to a sort of implicit understanding and living out of the idea that A leads to B leads to C, okay? You seek out a relationship, it doesn't work out. You try a new job, you don't get the job. You get the job, it's no good. All these negative outcomes of if A, then B, then C. And it does seem that psilocybin can have this effect of invoking new patterns of learning, new considerations about what might be possible, and indeed may even lead to actual rewiring of the emotion centers in the brain with these other brain areas and vice versa in ways that eject people from the psilocybin session thinking, I used to feel this way about something, work, relationships, myself, etc., but I'm willing to consider this other possibility, or this other possibility seems at least partially true to the extent that I'm willing to go out and evaluate that. Now, here I'm speaking very subjectively, but remember, we have to tie back the subjective experiences and changes of things like music and emotion and our relationship to life and jobs and relationships back to the cell biology and chemistry of psilocybin, because ultimately it really is just a chemical activating receptors, those receptors changing networks in the brain, and the journey itself seems to be the time when all of those changes are put in motion. It's like a boulder that gets rolling. In fact, I think the best way to think about psilocybin and other psychedelics is that they initiate the neuroplasticity process, but they are not the neuroplasticity process itself. And the journey itself is not where all the neuroplasticity occurs. We know that for sure. In fact, if you want to imagine how psilocybin and other psychedelics work to change the brain, think about them as a wedge that gets underneath the boulder that is the neuroplasticity that gets rolling forward. And then think about whether or not the plasticity is adaptive or maladaptive, whether or not it actually serves you in your life on a daily basis or not, depending on whether or not you're using your conscious brain to move that boulder in a particular direction, right? Not just bulldozing through things and destroying them, but clearing a path through old, ineffective, maybe even destructive patterns of thoughts or emotions, etc. I give you that analogy because I think it more accurately captures what psychedelics like psilocybin are doing, rather than the typical discussion around psychedelics that we tend to hear, which is that, it creates plasticity and plasticity is what you want.